Welcome here, everyone. My name is Phil. We got an exciting week this week for you. I'm glad you could join us. This week we'll be looking at Daniel and the lion's den. It's a crazy story from the Bible about a guy who spent a whole night in a cave with hungry lions. Then we'll make scary lion masks for our craft of the week. Let's get into the story. Okay, so the Israelites are in captivity. Some of them are living really far away from their home in Israel. And they can't get to the temple in Jerusalem, which is where they like to worship God. Daniel is one of them. So when the Israelites are far away from Jerusalem and they can't worship at the temple, they turn towards Jerusalem and they pray in that direction. So they're praying to God even though they can't be at the temple. So in captivity, there's Daniel. And there's some others, but we're just going to talk about Daniel. Now the king who's ruling over them is called Darius. King Darius. He's a king, yeah. So King Darius chooses 120 princes, they call them, throughout his whole kingdom, which is pretty big. And he also chooses 3 people to be presidents over them. Daniel was chosen to be one of these 3 presidents. Daniel was chosen because he was trustworthy and honest, and the king planned to put him in charge of his whole kingdom. That's a pretty big responsibility, especially for someone who is living in captivity. Now, these other leaders that King Darius put in charge started to get jealous of Daniel because the king trusted him so much and liked him so much. So they watched for Daniel to do something wrong so they could complain to the king. But they soon realized that they'd never find anything wrong with Daniel unless it had something to do with his God, because Daniel was a really great guy. Never really did anything wrong. So these leaders went to King Darius and they said, "Hey, Darius, man, King Guy Darius, you should make a law that says for 30 days no one pray to anyone except you. And if anyone breaks that law, they should be thrown in the lion's den." King Darius was like, I like to be worshipped and prayed to, so I guess that's what I'm gonna do. Good idea, guys. When Daniel heard about the law, he went down into his house. He opened his window that faced Jerusalem. He got down on his knees, and then he prayed, just like he did every day. 3 times a day, he prayed to God, facing Jerusalem, just as he had always done. The other leaders, they searched for Daniel, and they found him, praying to God. They hurried to King Darius and said, "Daniel ignored you, the king. He prays 3 times each day to his God." The leaders insisted that the king throw Daniel into the lion's den. The king was upset. But the law couldn't be changed. As Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, King Darius said, "May the God you serve rescue you." A large stone was placed over the opening, and the king sealed the stone with his ring. King Darius couldn't sleep all night. He tossed and he turned and he rolled over. And the next morning, he hurried to the lion's den and called out to Daniel. Hey Daniel, you alive and safe?" And then Daniel said, "Yes, God sent an angel and shut the lions' mouths. They haven't hurt me." King Darius was overjoyed, and he gave orders to take Daniel out of the lion's den. The king wrote a new law after that people in his kingdom should worship Daniel's God, because he is the living God and he rescued Daniel from the lions. So this past month, we've been talking a lot about obedience to God. And in the story today about Daniel, we see that sometimes it's really, really hard to be obedient and stand up for what you believe in. Daniel knew that there was no one else he should worship and follow except for God. So what was he supposed to do when his king said that he couldn't? Daniel still obeyed the king in everything else, except when the laws that king made went against what God said. And that took a lot of courage. This reminds me of something that Jesus said much later in the Bible. In the book of Matthew, some people asked Jesus if following him means that they don't have to pay taxes to Caesar anymore. Caesar was the guy who was in charge at the time. So Jesus told them to give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to give to God what is God's. What he meant by this is that we still need to follow the laws and the rules of the land, but only as far as they don't go against what God tells us to do. A law telling us to pay our taxes doesn't stop us from following the things that God tells us, but a law saying we can only worship the king instead of anyone else does. So that's why Daniel disobeyed the law in order to obey and follow God. Most of the time, the laws here in Canada aren't a problem, like how it's against the law to steal. Well, God also tells us not to steal, so that's okay. But when something like what Daniel experienced comes up, it can be really hard to stand up for what God says. We need to ask God to give us courage to obey and follow Him, even when it's hard. In this week's craft, we'll be making scary lion masks, like the lions in our story. See if you can make one at home. For our craft of the week, we're going to be making scary lion masks. Let's see what we need. Markers, a popsicle stick or tongue depressor, scissors, your lion mask ears, and your lion mask template, which is a paper plate. You'll also need glue or tape. If you're part of our club, you'll have these 2 lion ears cut out of a paper plate, and you'll have our lion mask template with eye holes cut in it already. The first step you're going to want to do is color your mask. I'm going to use markers because I have them, but you could also use paint if you have that at home. You could use pencil crayons, or you could use markers. The first color I'm going to use is yellow, and I'm going to color this inside circle, which is the lion's face. Now that I've colored the circle yellow, I'm going to use orange for my lion's mane, and that's going to be this whole area around the outside. Now that I've colored the lion's mane, I'm going to take my brown marker and I'm going to draw his face in. First I draw the nose and color it in. To do the nose, you can make an upside down triangle just below and between the eyes. Then draw a line straight down from that. From the bottom of the triangle, draw a line straight down. And then do 2 upside down curvy lines, sort of like 2 little smiley faces. And then you got your lion's mouth. And then I'm going to draw whiskers. There we go. Now my lion's got a face. Next, you're going to want to take your lion ears and color them. I'm going to use the same colors as before, yellow on the outside and brown on the inside. So because yellow is a light color and brown is a dark color, I can color the whole thing yellow, and then I can just draw brown over top. Now I have 2 little lion ears. So next, take your glue or tape, I'm going to use white glue, and put a bead of glue along the bottom edge of your ear. Then you're going to take your lion and you're going to stick it right on the edge and hold it for a few seconds so it can dry, and then do the same thing with the other ear. Now we have our lion mask like this, but it's not done yet. Take your scissors, ask an older sibling or your parent to help you, and we're gonna make little snips all the way around along the line. So it's a paper plate, so it's got these little folds all the way around it. So make one little snip all the way along on each of those little folds. When you get to the ears, hold the end down and then bend it up a little bit, and then you can snip behind them. But don't cut the ears because you want them to stay intact. Now that you've cut all the way around, you can bend the lion's mane around a little bit, make it look a little uneven. Now the last step is to take your popsicle stick or tongue depressor, turn your paper plate over, and you're going to put some glue on one end of your popsicle stick, just like that. And then on the bottom of your lion mask, you stick it on the back. Hold it for a bit so it can dry. Once it sticks, set it off to the side for a bit for the glue to dry. Then come back to it in a few minutes. By the end, you should have a fun lion mask. Rawr, 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 I'm a lion. Well, kids, I'm glad you could all join us this week. I hope you had a good time, and I'll see some of you on Wednesday in our Zoom call. Until then, bye.